going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode here at the Homestead. My name is Jeff, and as you can see behind me, things have changed a little bit here at the Everything Garage project. And if you're thinking, well, he probably forgot to shoot an intro to this week's video, and that's why he's standing inside a fully framed garage, you'd be right, and I did very much forget to shoot the intro. So without further ado, that's what this week's video is all about. We take the Everything Garage project from just a big hunk of concrete up to a project that is actually looking like a garage.
Alright, so let's jump into framing. So you'll notice here as I'm building, I'm making sure to crown all of the studs. And what this means is that any bow that comes naturally in the lumber, I'm placing upwards so they're all in the same direction. Having them all in the same direction makes it much easier when it comes to sheeting or drywalling or anything for that matter, just so that you have the same consistency all the way along. It's hard to see here, and there is a better example later on, but what I'm using is a screw to flush up my beam to my surrounding studs and then nailing it in place. This ensures that my front face is flush all the way along. We stand our walls, we start adding the crown plate. This is the second 2x6 you see on the top of each wall. We use these to hold walls both square at a 90 degree or, in the case of our walls that are heavy and long, together in one long line after they've been stood. On this particular crown plate I'm adding now that we've left an overhang that'll overlap the wall we stand next. Moving back into wall framing for a second, take a minute to actually make sure your walls are square before you start sheeting them. It'll save you time and headaches in the long run. Walls directly on concrete, make sure you have something between the wall and the concrete itself. So in our case we're using PL Premium construction adhesive, but you can also use something like a sill gasket. The goal of this is to create an air gap between the outside and the inside of a building. Now in our case we aren't insulating the building, so it's not quite as critical, but if we ever did want to insulate down the line in the future, at least we would know this step was done. Here's a better look at how I'm using screws to help flush up my header with the outside of my wall. All I've done is drilled them into the header themselves, and then I'm using the claw of my hammer to pry that header upwards before I nail it in place. With the walls framed, it's time to firmly anchor them into the grade beam. Now there's multiple ways of doing this, the first being an anchor bolt that is placed into the concrete while it is being pulled. Another option is to drill your holes after the walls have already been stood and insert leg sleeves down into the concrete below. They act like a drywall anchor and spread when a screw is inserted. From there we use leg screws with large washers to suck the wall down tight to the concrete grade beam. The last step before starting our roof structure is to plumb our walls and make sure everything is perfectly square and plumb. To do this, we add a bunch of cross bracing and create kind of what looks like a spider web, pulling the walls in each different direction until they are perfectly plumb. Seeing the roof trusses show up was kind of an exciting moment because it let everyone know we're kind of moving into the second half of the build and really seeing this garage come together. Installing these was also going to be a rather straightforward process because we had already done the layout on top of our crown plate and we knew where everything was going to sit. Everything sat line X at 2 feet on center. The hardest part of installing them really is just hoofing them on top of the walls to get them installed, especially those end gables that came sheeted even though they really weren't supposed to. It's a rather repetitive process of lift, install, but I do have to give a big shout out to my neighbor. Thanks for coming and giving us an extra set of hands, which really sped up the process. With all the trusses in place, it was time to move on to the lookouts. These form the soffits up on the gables. Now, one thing to consider if you're ever getting trusses manufactured is to order drop-end trusses, and what this means is the final truss, or the gable truss, is 3.5 inches lower than the second truss inwards. What this allows you to do is tie your lookouts into that second truss, giving you an overall stronger structure, especially in your soffit. The other benefit is you don't need to build these while standing on a tall ladder leaning up against that gable. They can all be built while standing comfortably inside the trusses. At this point, all we had to do was sheet the roof, and this project was wrapped up. Well, at least as far as the framing goes. There wasn't much action to record here. It was simply just lifting sheets up and getting them nailed in place. On top of that, we were rushing to beat what looked like an ominous rain cloud and thunderstorm rolling in pretty quickly. Luckily, we wrapped everything up just in time before the skies opened up and the rain came down.